nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Binashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvad Kṛṣṇa-kathā-mahamrita-payo-rasho mudake-nato Bande Bhagavatan iman-anudavam Murdnani patyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tishe Namah Jayatam Surato Pongo Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Kulari Devatamor Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Adananastrinam Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhyudisam Janma Janmani Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajendhum Shri Rupa Para Kamala Shrita Cheta Same Chittam Satam Madhukari Yatupada Padme Yaramya Nikilaga Shanga Samani Shutra Tritim Sangata Yasvadyarasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Yadhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yad Hari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava Charjas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire in this world, Shri Rupa Goswami Pad. Again today we continue discussion of Padyavali. So we'll begin the Kṛṣṇa-kathā Mahatya Prakaran, the section on the greatness of discussion of Sri Krishna. So we finished last time the Namakirtana Prakaranam, or examples of Namakirtan. So now, having spoken about the greatness of Bhagavan's name and the manner in which it may be called or chanted and prayed up over, then we come to a second subject of Kṛṣṇa-kathā Mahatmya, which is to say that the activities of hearing Kṛṣṇa-kathā, of speaking Kṛṣṇa-kathā, the value of those things will now be praised. And prior to both of these sections, there was mention of the greatness of bhakti. So we had the greatness of Krishna, and then the greatness of bhakti to Krishna, and then we had the greatness specifically of Krishna's name and the chanting of his name. So now the form of bhakti and of hearing about Krishna, speaking about Krishna, that's what we'll hear today and in the coming classes. So this is where we are in the flow of thought. Atha Shri Kṛṣṇa-kathā Mahatmyam. Now the greatness of discussion of Shri Krishna. śrutam Upaniṣadaṁ dūre hari-kathāmṛtāt yanna santi dravac-citta-kampāśru-pulakādayaḥ. Excuse me. Let the import of the Upaniṣads, even after hearing which, melting of the heart, trembling, tears, horripilation, and so forth do not occur, remain afar from the nectar of discussion of Hari. So, the import of the Upaniṣads, or Upaniṣadaṁ, refers to the subject matter to be taught by the foremost of the Vedas, the Upaniṣads. That is, the process of hearing, contemplating, and meditating upon undifferentiated Brahman. This is spoken of in a well-known passage of the Brihadaranyaka. Quote, truly, the Atma, in this context the word Atma means Brahman, is to be seen, that is, to be heard about, to be contemplated, and to be deeply meditated upon. O Maitreyi, truly by seeing, that is, by hearing, reflecting upon, and realizing the Atma, everything becomes known. So this is a well-known passage. It's discussed also by Jiva Goswami in the Bhakti Sandarbha, with reference to what he calls vichar pradhan, the path of taking to bhakti by means of deliberation or vichar, that one will follow this adage given here, which is to say that Brahman is drashtabhya. Brahman is to be realized, or Brahman is to be experienced, to be seen. And how do you do that? By hearing about him, by contemplating what you hear, and then meditating upon him in the appropriate manner, or however you want to describe Brahman. And by doing so, one realizes Brahman, and by knowing Brahman, everything is known. So, Jiva Goswami speaks in contrast to that in the Bhakti Sandarbha about something he calls ruchi pradhan, the path of taking to bhakti wherein ruchi is predominant, where he says that from sadhu sangha there is lila katha shravan, or hearing of the lila of Krishna. From that comes ruchi, or some taste for that, and from that taste comes shraddha, in Bhagavan, in bhakti, and so forth. So he mentions this verse in connection to these two different paths. And more broadly, this verse is said to refer or be a matter of primary focus for those who follow the Jnana Marg. So for them, Brahman, especially Nirvishesh Brahman, is the object of their sadhana, and their means of realizing that is to meditate upon it, having acquired apt understanding of it based on the Upaniṣads. So they hear about it, meaning they study the Upaniṣads, and they contemplate, they deliberate, they acquire, a refined understanding of it, such that they leave aside all else and meditate upon it exclusively, and thereby come to realize it. So, that process is what is referred to here as Upaniṣada, according to the commentator. So the word Upaniṣad would, meaning a particular section of the Vedas, or the Vedas, section of the Vedas that is said to speak and teach about Brahman specifically. So then you have this derivative word, Upaniṣada. In other words, the thing that the Upaniṣads teach, or the thing that the Upaniṣads are about. So he doesn't say that the Upaniṣada is simply Brahman, but rather is this particular process of realizing Brahman. So then that is held in contrast to hari-kathāmṛtāt, or the nectar of discussion of Hari. So then, in other words, there's this analytical process, and then there's this process of hearing about Hari, meaning about his forms, his qualities, his leelas, his companions, his essential nature, and so on. So, perceived in contrast, then the expression here of Vyas is said to be that leave aside this analytical process. Let us simply drink the nectar of hari-kathā. Let us simply hear about Krishna, let us hear about Bhagavan, and let us absorb ourselves in bhakti to Bhagavan. Let us not bother with this analytical process by which one can come to understand and meditate upon Brahman. This, in gist, is the distinction being made. So we'll look at a few additional points here. Discussion, or katha, that is narrative about Hari, is described as nectar, amrita, in this verse, because of its being supremely relishable. After having attained that nectar of discussion of Hari, let the import of the Upaniṣads that was heard by me previously remain afar. So this alludes to an instance in which someone who may have had association with those following the Jnana-marg, or who themselves may have taken up the path of the Jnana-marg, upon acquiring association with bhakta sadhus and hearing Kṛṣṇa-kathā, thinks, let me leave aside this path of Gyan, let me leave aside this analytical approach, let me simply absorb myself in the nectar of Kṛṣṇa-kathā. So, quote, it is not fit to be present in the midst of that nectar, is the purport. So in other words, the process of doing the analysis that's referred to here by Shrastravya, Drostravya, Mantavya, this manana process, which is referred to there, means by, use of, or you could say like sharp use of anuman or tarka to arrive at conclusions and, refute other possibilities. There's another statement in the Brihadaranyaka which uses this phrase, neti. In other words, one can't specifically conceive or even describe Brahman directly, but one can negate that it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. So by scrutinous examination of the characteristics of various things, one can go about this process of negating and so on. So that is, as we hear about in the Sindhu, something that is hardening to the heart. Rupa Goswami describes Gyan and Vairagya as something that are hardening to the citta, whereas bhakti is something that is very soft. So they have different effects, they have a different spirit, they have a different texture, if you will. One is hard and one is soft. So upon acquiring affinity for this softness, then this hardness is felt to be abrasive, it's felt to be unpleasant, it's felt to be unfavorable. So it's not fit to be present in the midst of that nectar. This is how the commentator is taking the purport. In other words, it doesn't belong here. This type of analysis isn't fit, or this type of approach, this type of hard analytical attitude, this won't apply when one is hearing about Krishna's Leelas. That's not the manner by which they're aptly understood and appreciated. So he goes on. If the question is raised, why should that process remain afar? Then it is said that process in which transformations of the psyche, or sattvika vikaras, such as melting of the heart, trembling, tears, horripilation, and so on, do not occur. So this analytical approach, this hardness of the heart, it doesn't lead to sattvika bhavas, or it doesn't lead to the melting of the heart. Just as we heard in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita we heard today, that this kampadaya lakshanam was chitta ardrata jatam, that the trembling or crying or horripilation, these were said to be produced by meltedness of the heart. So the hardening of the heart and the melting of the heart are not the same. Rather, they're opposite. The word melting also, ardrata, is also sometimes, or one meaning that it also conveys is softening. So softening and hardening, as these things are antithetical, so also then the softening of the heart that comes about by contemplation of Bhagavan's form, qualities, and so on, this is the opposite of the hardening that comes about by, reductive intellectual analysis. So that process of the hardening, the process that leads to hardening, should be kept afar because it restricts the softening, or it doesn't allow the things that emerge from the softening to come out. This verse thus shows the superiority of discussion of Hari in comparison to the subject matter to be taught by the Shrutis, that is, hearing, contemplating, and meditating upon undifferentiated Brahman. So, this is how the commentator deals with it. So what I'm adding here is that in the Bhakti Sandarbha, there is a section which ends with citation of this verse. So we'll look at how Jiva Goswami has also cited this verse in the course of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which will also give us further insight into the verse's import. So the context is that he's in the early section of the Bhakti Sandarbha in the course of establishing the Bhakti to be the Abhideya. And in the course of that, he cites the following statement. If an adept in Shabda Brahman, that is the Vedas, shall not become adept in Para Brahman, that is, the object taught by Shabda Brahman, the result of one's labor in studying Shabda Brahman, like the labor of a keeper of a cow that does not produce milk, is only that labor itself. So if you do, you do the labor of going through a process, but you don't get the result of the process, then what did you get? You just got the labor of doing the process. You didn't get the fruit, so to speak. So what's the point of learning Shastra? What's the point of becoming adept in the Vedas or the Shabda Brahman? The point is to experience Para Brahman. The point is to realize the subject or the object that the texts speak about, that they're meant to lead you to, that they describe. So if you acquire all types of skill and knowledge in the text, but you don't get realization of the object that the text is pointing out, or that is meant to lead you to, then you're not successful. Rather, the only fruit that you have of your labor is your labor itself. So he elaborates on this. So this is all from the Bhakti Sandarbha. Although Parabrahman is established as the subject to be taught by Shabda Brahman, verily in all its sections, and in particular in the Upaniṣads, fixity in Parabrahman does not arise even by crores of deliberations thereupon. Whereas fixity upon Parabrahman in the form of Bhagavan as well, that is, in addition to fixity upon undifferentiated Brahman, arises just by studying that part of the Shabda Brahman, wherein the Leelas and so forth of Parabrahman in the form of Sri Bhagavan are taught. So this is how he's drawing out the purport of the statement. In other words, one can go on studying the Upanishads, do deliberation upon what they said, he says, crores of times, but one will not achieve nishta, or one will not become fully fixed in Parabrahman by that. But by hearing of Bhagavan's Leela, by hearing of Parabrahman's Leela as Bhagavan, then that fixity upon him can come about. So in other words, hearing about Bhagavan is a more effective means of absorbing the mind and becoming fixed upon the object of the Shastra than deliberating on the nature of Brahman. So now he cites a couple of verses from the Bhagavatam which present this conclusion. Quote, "For a person tormented by the forest fire of various miseries, who is desirous of crossing over the exceedingly difficult to cross ocean of samsara, there is no vessel other than honoring the rasa of discussion of the Leela of Bhagavan Purushottama." So here you have the Bhagavatam saying, you want to cross samsara? There's no other way but hearing the Leela of Bhagavan. In other words, he's citing this to imply that, but when it says hearing the Leela of Bhagavan is the only way, it implies doing analysis on the nature of Brahman is not the way. You have to hear about the Leela of Bhagavan. And then he cites another verse, which we've discussed at length in the past, from the early in the Brahma Stav. O Lord, those who abandon the path of bhakti to you, that from which there is a flow of auspiciousness, or that which is the path of auspiciousness, and struggle to attain awareness of oneness, only this hardship remains and nothing else, as is the case for those who thresh thick chaff. In other words, when you thresh chaff that's already been threshed and has no more grain, you're not going to get any grain. Similarly, if you abandon the path of bhakti, and you abandon the process of hearing about Bhagavan, worshipping Bhagavan, and try to realize Brahman, it won't work. So these two statements are cited to support this idea that fixity upon Brahman comes about by hearing about Bhagavan, but it won't merely by doing deliberation upon things analytically. In other words, by rejecting bhakti and engaging only in jnana. So Jiva Goswami goes on. Therefore, Bhagavan Sri Krishna says with two verses, one should not study even Vedic statements that are devoid of description of my Leelas. So this is how Jiva Goswami is paraphrasing the next two verses. So Krishna says, my dear, one who maintains a milked out cow, in other words, a cow who no longer gives milk, an unchaste wife, a body belonging to another, that is, one who lives as a slave, wicked progeny, unsanctified wealth, speech bereft of me. I think they need an and there, or speech bereft of me, undergoes suffering after suffering, or double suffering. My dear, a wise person should not foster that barren speech that shall be without description of my purifying acts, of sustaining, manifesting, and dissolving this world, or my desired births and other leelas as leela avatars. So Bhagavan himself is saying, your speech should be about me. Don't bother talking about other things. Other speech which is devoid of description of me or reference to me, that is barren. It's without any fruit, without any richness, without any water. It's dry. So, similarly, when he says speech bereft of me causes double suffering, or causes only suffering after suffering. So therefore, based on these two verses, Jiva Goswami paraphrases them by saying, one should not study even Vedic statements that are devoid of description of my leelas. In other words, the focus that one should have, even in one's study of the Shastra, should be upon Bhagavan rather than only the deliberation upon Brahman found in the Upaniṣads. One should always integrate aspects of bhakti, discussion of Bhagavan. Thus it is stated by Narada, so he cites another verse, description of the qualities of he of highest praise, that is Sri Bhagavan. This indeed has been determined by the wise to be the unceasing, that is everlasting object or fruit of a person's austerity, hearing or learning of the Vedas, performance of sacrifice, recitation of the mantras and hymns, intelligence and charity. So here, hearing about Bhagavan is said to be the fruit or a higher thing that you get as a result of having studied Vedas or having recited Vedas or having done some of this analytical analysis. In other words, it's the only process that will lead to success, and it's a greater fortune than engaging in only the analytical side of it. So having said all of this, to further substantiate his point, Jiva Goswami now cites the verse under discussion. Therefore, it has been sung by Sri Bhagavan, the avatar who is the purifier of the age of Kali. Quote, let the import of the Upaniṣads, even after hearing which melting of the heart, trembling, tears, horripilation, and so forth do not occur, remain afar from the nectar of discussion of Hari. So in other words, Jiva Goswami here is saying that this verse was on some occasion cited by or sung by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we don't find any citation of this verse in the Kṛṣṇa-Keli-caritāmṛtāni, in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, or to my knowledge any of the other texts that describe Mahaprabhu's Leelas. But Jiva Goswami evidently came to know that in some occasion Mahaprabhu made this statement. By inference, we could say perhaps in the course of his visit to Kashi or his discussion with Sarvabhauma, or there might be some logical places where it might have arisen, or it might have just been something he remarked from time to time. But in any case, it's significant that Jiva Goswami says that this is a statement or a point of emphasis given by Mahaprabhu himself. So, as we know, when he met with the sannyasis in Kashi, they questioned him, "You're a sannyasi. Why aren't you studying Vedanta? Why are you only doing kirtan? Why are you, not following the process of jnana as we are?" So in the course of explaining these things, then Mahaprabhu gave the explanation of the Chatushloki of the Bhagavat and other things to show that fixity upon Bhagavan is the ultimate form of fixity upon the Paratattva. So it's in keeping, so to speak, with the line of thought and the principles that he taught them. So in any case, here he's starting the prakaran about the greatness of Kṛṣṇa-kathā. So the first greatness that he's showing is that it's greater even than this, in other words, this form of bhakti yoga is greater even than jnana yoga, or it's greater than the, astute intellectual analysis using inference of the Shastra in order to understand the nature of Brahman. So, having thus described discussion of Hari as being superior to hearing about undifferentiated Brahman, the compiler next cites a verse that describes discussion of Hari as being superior even to mukti itself. So hearing hari-kathā is better than the process to achieve moksha. And it's better than even attaining moksha. So this is quite a powerful point. So this comes as follows: naiva divya-sukha-bhogam arthaye, nāpavargam nātha kāmaye, yāntu karṇa-vivaraṁ dine, kṛṣṇa-keli-caritāmṛtāni me. Indeed, neither do I wish for enjoyment of heavenly pleasure, nor do I desire, O Lord, even liberation. May the nectars of narratives of Krishna's play enter the hollows of my ears day after day. I don't want svarga, I don't want moksha, I just want to hear about Krishna every day. So, quote, heavenly pleasure refers to that manifested in svarga. Liberation refers to mukti. After the author states what he does not seek in the first two lines of the verse, the commentator considers that Sri Bhagavan then asks the author, "O Bhakta, then what do you pray for?" To this he replies, "I pray, may the nectars of narratives of Krishna's play enter the hollows of my ears day after day." So, quote, day after day means every day, and the repetition of the word day is done out of intense longing. Or in other words, the repetition is meant to convey that he cherishes this Kṛṣṇa-kathā very much. He has great desire to hear it. And the nectars of narratives of Krishna's play refers to the nectars of discussions about Krishna related to Madhura Rasa. So the word Keli, although loosely is a word for play in general, often connotes play in the amorous sense. So the commentator takes it that here Kṛṣṇa-Keli refers specifically to Krishna's Leela with the Braja Gopis. or his lila in which madhura rasa is relished. The commentator cites the following verse from Srimad Bhagavatam as a precedent for the prayer expressed in this verse. Quote, O Lord, that bliss which can arise for embodied beings from meditation upon your lotus feet, or through hearing narratives about you from persons who are your own, does not occur even in realization of Brahman, your own all-pervading greatness. How then could it occur for the devas of Svarga, those who all eventually fall from airplanes slashed by the sword of death? Meaning they may have it great for a while in Svarga, but eventually time prevails and they fall again from that celestial realm and when their karma is exhausted. So that working of karma or time or death is compared to a sword which slashes their flower airplanes apart and causes them to fall back down to the karma bhumi, or the land of the earth. So here the Bhagavatam is saying that hearing narratives about you, that the bliss that arises from that doesn't arise even in realization of Brahman. So, applying that idea, if there's more bliss in hearing these narrations than there is in Brahman, then I don't want to realize Brahman. I don't want moksha. I want to hear that katha. I want to hear that Kṛṣṇa-kathā day after day. So this is the expression of the author, and thus the implication or the purport is that Kṛṣṇa-kathā, or hearing Kṛṣṇa-kathā, has a position or affords an opportunity or an experience which is superior even to the attainment of moksha. Next, the compiler cites a verse that describes the nectar of discussion of Hari's ability to dispel the affliction, or literally heat, of the age of Kali. So the word tapa or tapa is a common word which means pain or suffering, but also arises from, or etymologically originates in, the concept of being subjected to intense heat or burning. So the commentator chooses that particular word because of the metaphor in the coming verse. So I include the etymological sense as well, so that the metaphor is better appreciated. And this verse has some nice alliteration. If you notice, in the first opening 4 syllables of each line, the same pairs of syllables repeat. So this is some nice poetic ornamentation. He says, ahobhir kaler vidūyate, sudhā-sudhārā-madhuraṁ pade, dine candana-candra-śītalaṁ, yaśodā-tanayasya. So, aho, one is not afflicted by the days of Kali, when day by day the glory of Yaśoda's son is sung, which from moment to moment is sweeter than a stream of excellent nectar, and more cooling than sandalwood and the moon. I'll read it one more time. Aho! One is not afflicted by the days of Kali, when day by day the glory of Yaśoda's son is sung, which from moment to moment is sweeter than a stream of excellent nectar, and more cooling than sandalwood and the moon. So there's 2 common words for day in Sanskrit. One is dine, as is mentioned in the 3rd line here, dine, and also the word aha. So when you put that into the plural form of the 3rd case, it becomes ahobhir. And then there's a separate word, which is an emotive particle, aho. So he's paired the emotive particle aho with the declension of the word aha in the 3rd case plural, where it becomes aho, in order to create this repetition in sound, ahobhir. and so on. I don't want to go into too much of the grammatical side of things. So, aho is stated in the spirit of compassion. In other words, it's quite miserable in the midst of Kali's, quarrels, but, having compassion for those suffering from them, there is hope. In other words, this Kṛṣṇa-kathā is the hope. Pade, rendered above as from moment to moment, in accord with Sri Samipad's commentary on 1.119 in the Bhagavad, can also be understood to mean in every statement. So a pada can refer to a line or a foot of a verse or a phrase or a statement, as well as to a moment. So you can take it as every statement of this Kṛṣṇa-kathā is filled with sweet nectar, or that at every moment of hearing it, there is the experience of drinking sweet nectar. Then candana-candra-śītalaṁ, rendered above as more cooling than sandalwood and the moon, can also be understood to mean more cooling than camphor mixed with sandalwood paste. So the word chandra commonly refers to the moon, but is also a word which can mean camphor, because Indu, Chandra, these words also are used to refer to camphor. So candana-candra can be a dual compound, meaning chandan, sandalwood, and the moon, or it can mean chandan with chandra, and chandra meaning sandalwood, camphor, so then you have camphor mixed with sandalwood. So when you mix those two, then that's known to be a pleasing, cooling paste, so you can take it in either sense. The purport is that because singing of the glory of Bhagavan Sri Krishna is in every expression and at every moment sweeter than a stream of excellent nectar, and more cooling than sandalwood mixed with camphor and the moon, it can certainly relieve from the affliction or heat of the age of Kali. So this is where the etymological notion or sense of the word tapa is drawn upon in the verse. So, as the moon, as sandalwood and so forth are thought to be cooling, as drinking nectar is said to be cooling, then the implication in the verse is that the days, in other words, the time when the sun is shining, are troublesome, or it's a hot, burning hot day. The age of Kali is compared here to like long, hot days, which are difficult to tolerate. But as one can tolerate long, hot days when the cooling sandalwood is applied to the forehead and sweet nectar is drunk, then by drinking this Kṛṣṇa-kathā, one can alleviate the suffering of this circumstance. So this is the implication. Alright, we'll do one more. Next, the compiler cites a verse that describes discussion of Hari's superiority even to Sayujya Mukti, the supreme desired object of Jnanis. Nanda Nandana Kaishora Lilamritamaham Buddho Nibhagnanam Kimasmakam Nirvana Lavanam Basa. What of the salt water of nirvana? For we who are immersed in the vast ocean of the nectar of the leeling of Nanda's darling adolescent. So for we who are immersed in the vast ocean of the nectar of the Leela of Nanda's darling adolescent, refers to those who are supremely blissful because of their being relishers of the nectar of Sri Krishna's Leela, through discussion thereof. And the mention specifically of Sri Krishna's being an adolescent implies that these relishers of his Leela are worshippers of his adolescent form of Sri Krishna, the aim of whose sadhana is Madhura Rati. The nectar of this type of Leela of Sri Krishna is compared to an ocean in the verse because of its inexhaustibility and incomprehensibility. nirvana refers to sayuja mukti, and its being compared to salt water is meant to imply that it is of no use to those immersed in the ocean of the nectar of Sri Krishna's Leela, because of salt water's paucity and unpalatability in comparison to the ocean of the nectar of Sri Krishna's Leela, and salt waters being prohibited even for ritual purification, or achman. That is, it's not being applicable in any way in service to Sri Krishna, just as there is no prospect of attaining service to Sri Krishna for a jiva who has entered the state of sayuja mukti. So if you're in an ocean of nectar, what do you need salt water for? You don't even want fresh water, what to speak of salt water? So similarly, if you're drinking something highly palatable, why would you drink something that's unpalatable? So if you have this most wonderful thing, you're not interested in anything lesser. So the implication is that just hearing Kṛṣṇa-kathā, even in the embodied state in samsara, is an even more wonderful or more profound experience of bliss than the attainment of sayuja mukti. So it's most palatable, it's most relishable, it's also inexhaustible. So why would one ever give that up, even for sayuja mukti? And the other implication he draws out is that salt water cannot use it for puja, right? You have to use fresh water, you have to use palatable, purifying water in the course of puja. So salt water is something by category inadmissible. So similarly, for someone who enters the state of sayuja mukti, then there's no scope to hear any more Kṛṣṇa-kathā. There's no more scope to render any service to Krishna. One becomes debarred, so to speak. So in that sense also, nirvana or sayuja mukti is compared to salt water. So in this way, the verses are showing different greatnesses of Kṛṣṇa-kathā, greater than hearing about the process to realize Brahman, greater than realization of Brahman itself, greater than the attainment of moksha, and capable of dispelling all the troubles of the quarrelsome state of the world. Absorption in Kṛṣṇa-kathā is praised in all these ways. So I'll leave it at that for today, and we'll continue to hear more about the greatness of Kṛṣṇa-kathā, which is all, of course, whetting our appetite for the Kṛṣṇa-kathā to come. In other words, all the wonderful specific descriptions of Krishna and his Leela and his Prema and his parikaras that fill this Padyavali. This is just exciting us, so to speak, to dive directly into that before long. So I'll conclude here. Yes, I see a hand.
Thank you. There are 5 types of muktis, which is samipya, sarshti, sarupya, what else? And so sayuja is not, which is usually basically merging with the body of the Lord. It's not Vaishnava mukti. However, the other 4 are. And all of these 4, they refer to Vaikuntha, actually, liberations. And I was wondering, because I never heard, we went through Priti Sandarbha, I never understood which mukti refers to Goloka, those who, want to attain Goloka. Would you be able to?
Those terms are not, they typically refer to attainment of Vaikuntha, but they're not limited to that. So samipya, or quote, nearness, doesn't have to mean only the nearness of Narayan in Vaikuntha. It can also refer to the attainment of nearness to another form of Bhagavan in another Dham.
What about sarshti?
Sharshti will refer to attainment of some of the Shri, or some of the wealth or the potency or the opulence of Bhagavan. So his parikaras and all his domains have some degree of that. But no doubt in Vaikuntha it's more pronounced.
How about Sarupya? Obtaining the form, just like the Lord. That's specifically to Vaikuntha, because in Vaikuntha, that four forms.
I mean, Sarupya can be taken literally like that. It can also be taken more broadly to mean a form which is apt to be in the company of Bhagavan's form, or akin to Bhagavan's form. If we want to think of it in relation to Goloka, then we can say, a Gopa form, a form that is, akin to one of a member of Krishna's clan, if you will.
Because they are of the Lord. So if you aspire to be following one of the parikaras that are of the Lord, you become like them in a sense of like pure copy of them in a sense of looking like them because of your adherence in bhakti. So it doesn't have to be the Lord. So it means that it can be just like his parshads. Right?
Sure, you could say that.
And I forgot the fifth liberation. Yeah.
Salokya, to be on the same domain.
But the thing is that, see, Vaikuntha Vasi, it's those who aim Vaikuntha, they specifically aim to those, like, this is what I understood, they target those specific desirable liberations, whereas those who aim to Braja Bhakti, they don't have that in mind because of their like desirelessness in their heart. They don't have no desires for bhakti, so then they don't aim for mukti at all. So that's why I'm asking which one of those are muktis are attained, because they're specifically like targeted by those who go to Vaikuntha.
Right, so it's explained in the Bhagavatam also that, persons may receive those even though they didn't seek them explicitly. And that for the sake of serving Bhagavan, these things are to be accepted. If one aspires to serve Bhagavan with the bhav of a Braja Parikar, how will one ever do that if one doesn't get a form and doesn't get entrance into the place where those people exist and that service is possible? It's not possible. So, there will be attainment of that in the course of fulfilling one's object, but the stress or the accent, if you will, upon the prayer and the attunement of the heart of the bhakta is upon the satisfaction of Bhagavan. So, even in the ordinary world, like if, people are in love and they think, I want to do something for the person I love, then they might, wear a particular dress on a particular day that's suited to a particular outing for the sake of pleasing that person. And then they might, spend money on acquiring that dress. And they might, in the process of fulfilling their ultimate purpose, which is making an expression of love, they also accept this dress and put on this dress and so on. It's not that they're, oh, that guy just wanted to dress up nice, therefore he did that. It's like, obviously that's not, he might have had fun, putting on an interesting dress or wearing a costume at a party. I mean, there might be some joy even that comes along with it, but it's easily understood that that wasn't the primary purpose of the activity, because if the person didn't love that other person in the first place, they would have never taken up the whole process of doing it at all. So similarly, to say that, Bhagavan, if it is understood that Bhagavan relishes the love of Braja Parikaras the most, that this is most profoundly pleasing to him, then someone can think, okay, then if I want to please Bhagavan to the greatest extent, let me do what pleases him the most. Okay, so that dham, that manner of prem, that style of activity, okay. In other words, their ultimate aim is to please Bhagavan, and because that's most conducive to the fulfillment of that objective, then they accept and to, in some sense, aspire for the form the participation,
Right.
the entrance, etc. But it's not that they just want to, be in that place and therefore they're doing it. It's like they're only accepting that as a secondary means to their primary objective.
So Gopi Bhav of Braja Bhav would compensate all or some of the muktis only because of the bhav itself. The bhav doesn't want anything else except seva and rasa, as opposed to Vaikuntha. Okay, thank you for that. Our question related to, previously we was talking about the quoted this verse of Bhagavatam, believe that only listening to Lila of Bhagavan is the way to actually obtain him and actually develop bhakti. The analysis is not helpful at all. So I would like to reflect on this, because the third verse, right in the beginning of Bhagavatam, which is Nigama Kalpatarogam Palam Kṛṣṇa-kathā dravac-citta-kampāśru-pulakādayaḥ, and then it says that this Bhagavatam is, because the Bhagavatam is this tree that fulfills, this gives the sweet fruits, and it's tasted only by rasikas, rasika bhava, right? So those who are rasikas, and so this verse is linked together clearly, and so my question is, I'm trying to understand better whether, and of course, Mahaprabhu always recommended kirtan. Kirtan meaning like together, you chant, you listen together, and then augments the bhakti by listening, by chanting in this way, like Bhagavad Gita says, Tasham, Zata-utanam, Vajdanprit-purvakam, they all come the same, the verbs come together to relish my katha. And this is how they taste the pleasure of my lila. So the sadhu-sangha is crucial, but because it says rasika bhavukaha, because it has to be relished by rasikas, otherwise nobody can relish Bhagavatam if it's not rasika of Bhagavatam, it's not recited by rasikas. So coming to the verse quoted, that it indicates listening to Krishna Lila is the only medicine or path, is that has to be, the hari-card has to be there. Of course, listening is fine, right, on any level, but my presumption is that you have to have hari-card or rasika bhakta, or at least wanting to, and someone who is speaking those lilas would be rasika, so his flavor, his mood reflect on the heart of listeners, as opposed to someone sitting in his room and reading Bhagavatam, because he doesn't have the association or direct contact. He just sits and reads lila. So my question would be here, what type of lila chanting you're talking about? Is it coming from listening from rasika, or is those reading one's own? When you reflect on the verse that you quoted earlier.
Well, there's a sliding scale, ideal is to hear, these things from a person who's steeped in them, who's profoundly realized them. So if one's so blessed to get that opportunity, that's best. And if not, then as per the guidance one's received from one's guru about how to go about the practice, then one can do that. If one is in a situation where there's no one to go and hear from, then one can read oneself. Sanatana Goswami makes this point in the Hari Bhakti Vilas. But all of these things, they always have to be understood in context and in the light of other teachings. It's not that any one statement, now needs like so many other things, like obviously it implies that one should be trained in the proper process, one should have a guru, one should hear according to the radhikar, one should understand the tattva. I mean, these things are all to be assumed when we read any one given statement in the, integrated into the system of approach that has been drawn out from the Bhagavatam by the Goswamis, explained in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and so forth.
Yes, thank you. Correct. Okay. It's this last thought came to mind is that so basically from what you explained, that jnana is defined strictly as pursuit of searching for Bhagavan, for absolute, but understanding that he is the impersonal Brahman, and trying to analyze him or it, I don't know, through Upaniṣads. And Bhakti is defined, Bhakti mark is defined as at least a searching for Bhagavan, personal God. Okay, so to make it clear, because on the course of your discussion, I didn't quite clear understood what jnana marg is. Does jnana marg specifically aims at impersonal Brahman, or just because study?
Yes.
Okay. So Vaishnavas don't study Upanishads, or they study Upanishads in context of understanding that he's Bhagavan, Aishwarya Bhagavan.
We can't say categorically that Vaishnavas do or don't study Upanishads. No doubt some Vaishnavas have written and commented on Upanishads. They've presented so many pramanas from the Upanishads. So it's not that, there's no place for it whatsoever, but the principal activity will be hearing about the Leela of Bhagavan, hearing about Bhagavan, and so on. And, practically speaking, the job of providing the necessary pramanas from the Upanishads for the path of bhakti, for the most part, the job has been done. So that one has to oneself go back and analyze all of them to demonstrate it for oneself. Maybe those who are highly prone to those type of considerations may feel the necessity for that, but it's not something compulsory. So, and it, as the whole point of what was cited here today, it's not something that directly is conducive to the melting of the heart and absorption in the Ishta Devata and so forth. So, according to social circumstance, should there be some need in the context of society or to, persons with a particular background, there may be some place for it. We're not going to categorically say it has no place, but for those who are, following the path of bhakti as taught by the Goswamis, then it's not anything that will have a great place of prominence. And as the whole point of the verse is that let us be, absorbed in this thing that's supremely relishable and melting of the heart. Let us not, spend our time on these things that are far less efficient. That's, the whole spirit of the thing.
Right. So, so let's say someone accuses Gaudiya Vaishnavas, you're doing so much this bhajan and so much Smaran, but you haven't studied Upaniṣads.
I don't know. Do we need to go into the, who cares what people say? People can make up anything. People can carry on, bringing up anything based on what their orientation may be of what they consider important based on, persons who give great stress to the Upanishads. That's fine. They're worshipable texts. They are the teachings of Vedavyas himself, they're supremely worshipable. We're not going to say that they're not valuable, and that those who wish to follow the path of studying them and realizing Brahman as described in them, let them do so as well. This is, not a matter of right and wrong, and if people take exception to the fact that Vaishnavas prefer to absorb themselves in the Bhagavatam or the Leelas described of Bhagavan, then what does that matter to the Vaishnavas? Just the fact that someone else doesn't appreciate what they do, then why should they even bat an eye at that? If the people, want to understand, let them, read all the texts that have already been written that explain why this is important. Jiva Goswami's whole analysis in the Tattva Sandarbha of how Bhagavatam can be regarded as the supreme Shruti, as the very essence of the whole Bhagavat. This is what Mahaprabhu stressed when he met the sannyasis at Varanasi. These things are very well known. If someone wants to learn about them, if someone sees some group of Vaishnavas that they're not a part of doing that, if they have any sense, then they'll think, okay, what is the textual tradition that brought about this practice? Let me go and see, how this has come about, what acharyas have established these things, what are their conclusions. If the person is serious, they won't even really be saying these things. They'll already just look to the source of what it is. And, if they wish to or value what is said there, then they may wish to speak about practitioners of it for further clarification of the nature of that path, and then they can contemplate it, they can reflect on it and do as they so wish. But that we as Vaishnavas have to constantly be insecure about what we're doing and concerned about whether people who maybe have a half-baked understanding of some other path take exception to this path, why should we even waste 5 minutes on them? What does it matter? If we remained concerned with that, we'll never leave samsara. We'll just constantly be replying to the next random, assertion that anyone cooks up. If we remain preoccupied with those things, we'll never achieve our own goal. So really, inquiry and discussion is meant for people who wish to imbibe it or consider it sincerely, and in a manner that will be conducive to the well-being of both. If someone actually really has those questions, let them go meet a Mahatma and sincerely ask those questions. Unless that's the context, there isn't really that much value in going into such matters. As there's various verses, there's some later here in the Padyavali, let people slander us, let people say anything, and we'll continue drinking, the wine of hari-kathā. This will be the spirit of absorption and joy in the path of bhakti, and ultimately that, the richness of it and the effects of being absorbed in that richness speak louder than any arguments we might make anyway. Anyhow, that's my 2 cents on the topic. I'll leave it at that for today. Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.